The battlefield was alive with sounds of war. Artillery boomed, soldiers shouted, and tanks rumbled across the ground. Yet, most of what the Germans saw wasn't real. Somewhere in the European theater of World War II, a secret U.S. Army unit was quietly performing one of the war's most extraordinary feats of deception. They weren't fighting in the usual sense. They were creating illusion, so convincing that enemy commanders believed they faced massive forces that didn't exist. This unit became known as the Ghost Army, and for decades, their story remained hidden from the world. The Ghost Army wasn't made up of typical soldiers. Instead, it was a collection of artists, designers, sound engineers, and creative minds drafted into the army. Their mission wasn't to storm beaches or fire rifles, but to trick the enemy. They inflated rubber tanks that looked real from a distance, used giant speakers to simulate the sounds of heavy artillery, and sent fake radio messages that made German intelligence think entire divisions were positioned in places where no soldiers stood. Every move they made was carefully calculated to manipulate what the enemy believed. Imagine walking across a battlefield and seeing rows of tanks and troops, hearing the clatter of boots and engines, only to discover later that none of it was real. That was the reality the Ghost Army created. Their work was dangerous, not because they faced direct combat all the time, but because exposure meant certain death. If the Germans realized the illusion, the unit would have been vulnerable. Yet they executed their missions with precision, using creativity as their weapon. Their efforts weren't just clever tricks, they saved countless lives. By misleading German forces, they diverted attention from real troop movements, reducing casualties among Allied soldiers. Battles were won, and armies moved forward, all thanks to a combination of artistry, strategy, and a deep understanding of human psychology. The Ghost Army's story is a testament to the power of ingenuity in war, showing that sometimes the mind can be mightier than guns. Even today, when historians reveal the full scope of their operations, it's hard to believe that entire divisions of tanks and troops existed only on paper, canvas, and sound waves. The Ghost Army transformed deception into a weapon, proving that the battlefield isn't always what it seems. Their missions were daring, their creativity unmatched, and their courage unquestionable. For decades, the world remained unaware of their impact, but the legacy of the Ghost Army continues to inspire awe and admiration. The Ghost Army was officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but to most people at the time, they were just a mysterious group of soldiers who didn't fit the usual mold. Unlike typical units filled with infantrymen or tank operators, this unit was made up of artists, illustrators, designers, sound engineers, and even actors. The Army had realized that conventional warfare wasn't the only way to defeat the enemy. Creativity could be a weapon too. Many members were recruited from art schools, advertising agencies, and theater companies across the United States. Their skills in painting, sculpture, stage design, and sound engineering made them perfect for creating illusions that could deceive entire armies. These were people who normally worked in studios, not battlefields, yet they were asked to apply their talents in the most dangerous and unpredictable conditions imaginable. The Ghost Army wasn't just a handful of specialists. It was a fully organized unit with nearly 1,100 men, divided into teams that focused on specific types of deception. Some were experts in visual tricks, designing inflatable tanks and vehicles that looked real from miles away. Others specialized in sound deception, creating recordings of troop movements, artillery fire, and tank engines that could be played through giant speakers to fool enemy forces. Another group managed radio deception, transmitting fake messages to suggest the presence of divisions that didn't exist. What made them so effective was the combination of talent and discipline. They were trained in military tactics, camouflage, and battlefield operations, so they could operate alongside traditional combat units without being detected. Yet, they were encouraged to think creatively, to imagine ways to make the enemy see what wasn't there. Their mission required boldness, precision, and a deep understanding of human perception, how the enemy could be fooled by what they saw and heard. Despite being unconventional, these men were soldiers. They endured the same hardships as frontline troops: long marches, unpredictable weather, and constant danger. But instead of fighting head-on, their battlefield was imagination and illusion. Their success depended not on bullets and bombs, but on their ability to trick, confuse, and mislead. In many ways, they became artists of war, blending creativity with strategy to accomplish missions that seemed impossible. The Ghost Army proved that war could be won not just with force, but with ingenuity. By the end of the conflict, their deceptions had misled enemy commanders countless times, saved thousands of lives, and demonstrated the extraordinary power of unconventional thinking in the deadliest of environments. The mission of the Ghost Army was simple in words but complex in execution: to deceive the enemy about the size, location, and movements of Allied forces. Instead of engaging in direct combat, their goal was to manipulate German intelligence, making commanders believe they faced massive armies where there were only a few soldiers, or none at all. Every action, from inflating rubber tanks to broadcasting fake radio messages, was designed to create an illusion so convincing that it would change the course of battles. The Ghost Army's work often began with careful planning and intelligence. Before a mission, the unit studied maps, troop movements, and enemy positions. They determined what the Germans needed to see and hear to be misled. Then, using a combination of visual, audio, and radio deception, they created a convincing reality. For example, if the real troops were preparing to cross a river at one location, the Ghost Army might simulate a large division gathering somewhere else, drawing enemy forces away from the actual crossing point. Their missions were high stakes. If the Germans discovered that an entire division was nothing more than rubber tanks and sound recordings, the deception would fail, and lives could be lost. Yet, the Ghost Army carried out these operations with remarkable precision. They often moved at night, setting up inflatable tanks and fake artillery in fields, forests, or even abandoned towns, ensuring that every detail, from shadows to spacing, looked authentic from a distance. The unit's mission extended beyond just creating illusions. It also included psychological impact. By convincing the enemy that the Allies had overwhelming numbers, they lowered morale among German troops and forced commanders to make mistakes. Entire divisions could be diverted to defend against threats that didn't exist, giving real soldiers a strategic advantage without a single shot being fired. In essence, the Ghost Army's mission was to win battles without engaging in traditional combat, relying on ingenuity, creativity, and the careful manipulation of perception. Their work required courage, because while they weren't on the front lines of conventional firefights, they were often close enough to danger that discovery could mean disaster. Every operation combined artistry, strategy, and a deep understanding of human psychology, proving that the mind could be as powerful a weapon as any gun or tank. One of the most famous tools of the Ghost Army was their inflatable tanks, jeeps, and artillery pieces. From a distance, these rubber decoys looked real enough to fool enemy reconnaissance planes and ground observers. Giant tanks that could be inflated in minutes were placed strategically on roads, fields, and hills, creating the illusion of large troop formations where none existed. The detail was astonishing. Even the shadows cast by the inflatables were carefully considered to match real equipment. These decoys were lightweight and portable, which made them perfect for rapid deployment. Soldiers could carry them in trucks, inflate them quickly, and move on before the enemy got close. This mobility allowed the Ghost Army to simulate entire divisions appearing suddenly in unexpected locations, forcing German commanders to react to threats that weren't real. In some operations, hundreds of inflatable tanks and vehicles were arranged to suggest massive armored forces preparing for battle. The ingenuity didn't stop at simply inflating rubber. The Ghost Army added realistic touches to enhance the illusion. Mud splatters, tracks, and carefully placed soldiers in the vicinity helped make the decoys convincing. When paired with sound deception and fake radio traffic, even experienced enemy observers were completely fooled. Aerial reconnaissance planes would take photos, reporting large formations of tanks that could only exist on paper and canvas. These decoys also played a psychological role. The Germans, seeing what appeared to be overwhelming Allied strength, often hesitated or diverted their forces unnecessarily. This delay or misallocation of resources directly benefited the real Allied troops, who could advance with fewer obstacles. The inflatable tanks became a kind of magic trick on the battlefield, combining artistry with strategy in a way that no one had imagined before. The work was not easy. Soldiers had to carry, set up, and sometimes defend these decoys under the threat of enemy detection. Yet, despite the danger, the Ghost Army succeeded in making entire battles appear far larger and more threatening than they actually were. Their inflatable tanks were more than props. They were instruments of survival, strategy, and deception that changed the way the enemy perceived the battlefield. The Ghost Army didn't rely on visual tricks alone. They also mastered the art of sound deception. Using massive speakers mounted on trucks, they could broadcast the sounds of tanks, artillery, trucks, and marching troops over long distances, fooling German soldiers into thinking massive forces were nearby. Even from miles away, the noise of engines and gunfire made enemy scouts believe a full division was advancing. Sound engineers in the unit carefully recorded every noise they needed. The clatter of tank treads, the hum of engines, and the rhythmic march of soldiers. These recordings were played in coordination with the placement of inflatable tanks and fake encampments, creating a complete illusion of a large army moving and preparing for battle. The synchronization had to be perfect. Too little sound and the illusion failed. Too much, and it might reveal the trick. The effect was extraordinary. German forces, hearing the approach of massive armored units, often diverted troops or fortified positions in the wrong place. Some even reported battles that hadn't happened, sending inaccurate intelligence up the chain. This audio deception amplified the visual illusions, making them almost impossible to detect from the air or ground. The Ghost Army sound tricks weren't just about volume, they were about realism and timing. Engineers adjusted the pitch, distance, and duration of the sounds, simulating units moving, stopping, and engaging in combat. Sometimes, the sounds would suggest an entire division had arrived overnight, forcing the enemy to react immediately. Through sound, the Ghost Army turned empty fields into roaring battle zones. Where the Germans expected to see hundreds of tanks and thousands of troops, there were often only a few real soldiers. But the combination of visual and audio illusions made it seem impossible to tell the difference. These sound operations became a key weapon in the unit's arsenal, proving that war could be fought and won with cleverness, creativity, and psychological insight rather than sheer firepower. The Ghost Army's deception wasn't limited to what the enemy could see or hear. They also controlled what the Germans believed through fake radio traffic. Skilled radio operators in the unit transmitted messages that mimicked the communication patterns of entire divisions, making it appear that massive troop movements were underway. These transmissions were carefully designed to fool German intelligence analysts, who intercepted the signals and assumed real forces were being coordinated across the front. The operators studied authentic radio procedures from real units, copying the language, codes, and timing to perfection. Even experienced enemy listeners couldn't distinguish the fake transmissions from the real ones. Sometimes, the Ghost Army would simulate supply requests, troop deployments, or battlefield updates, all of which gave the impression of a fully operational division where there was none. By combining radio deception with inflatable tanks and sound illusions, the Ghost Army created a multi-layered illusion, so convincing that German commanders were consistently misled. They might reposition troops to defend against a threat that didn't exist or delay attacks because they believed they were outnumbered. This manipulation of intelligence saved countless lives by reducing the risk to actual Allied soldiers and giving them a strategic advantage. The use of fake radio traffic also demonstrated the Ghost Army's understanding of psychological warfare. They knew the enemy's reliance on communications and used it to their advantage. Every beep, signal, and coded message became part of an elaborate story, convincing the Germans that they faced forces far larger than reality. In essence, the Ghost Army turned information itself into a weapon. By controlling what the enemy heard, saw, and believed, they reshaped the battlefield without firing a single shot. Their mastery of radio deception, combined with visual and sound illusions, made them one of the most innovative and effective units of World War II, proving that ingenuity could be as deadly as artillery. The Ghost Army's success depended not only on inflatable tanks, sound, and radio trickery, but also on masterful camouflage and visual deception. Every detail mattered. Shadows, patterns, and placement were meticulously planned to make fake units look convincingly real from the air and ground. Artists in the unit painted realistic markings on decoys, added mud to wheels, and even simulated wear and tear on equipment, so observers wouldn't suspect the truth. They also created entire fake encampments, with tents, fires, and supplies arranged to suggest hundreds or thousands of soldiers. Roads were lined with carefully placed footprints and vehicle tracks, and decoy soldiers were positioned to make movements appear natural. In some cases, fake artillery pieces and vehicles were set up on hillsides, complete with camouflaged netting, so that aerial reconnaissance would report large troop concentrations. Attention to detail extended to shadows and perspective. Artists knew that from a distance, shadows could reveal the real shape and size of objects. They adjusted the positioning of inflatable tanks and other props to ensure that shadows matched what an observer would expect from real vehicles. Even sunlight and terrain were considered to maximize the illusion. The visual tricks were combined with timing and movement. Soldiers would occasionally move between decoys, creating the impression of activity and readiness. When paired with sound illusions and fake radio traffic, these visual tricks created a seamless and highly believable battlefield scene. The level of creativity and precision required was extraordinary. Soldiers were not just following orders, they were problem solvers, artists, and strategists. Their camouflage work turned empty fields into convincing battle zones and convinced the enemy that they faced far larger forces than actually existed. Through this artistry, the Ghost Army demonstrated that in war, perception could be just as powerful as reality. Behind the Ghost Army's illusions were real soldiers facing real danger, even if they weren't on the front lines in the traditional sense. These men were young Americans, artists, engineers, designers, suddenly thrust into the chaos of war. They had to adapt their creative skills to a battlefield where mistakes could cost lives. Every inflatable tank, every sound broadcast, every fake radio message relied on their precision, courage, and quick thinking. Life in the unit was a mix of ordinary soldier duties and extraordinary tasks. During the day, they marched long distances, set up decoys, and maintained equipment. At night, they often worked under the cover of darkness, inflating tanks, positioning fake artillery, and broadcasting sound effects, all while remaining alert for enemy scouts. The work was exhausting, stressful, and sometimes terrifying. Many soldiers shared stories of narrow escapes. In some operations, the enemy came alarmingly close to discovering the illusions, forcing the men to act quickly to maintain the deception. Yet, despite the constant risk, they remained committed to their mission. Their creativity became a weapon, and their discipline ensured that illusions held up under scrutiny from both the ground and the air. The Ghost Army also formed a unique bond between artists and traditional soldiers. Painters, Sculptors and sound engineers worked side by side with infantrymen and logistics teams, learning to merge imagination with military strategy. Each member played a vital role, whether designing decoys, recording battlefield sounds, or transmitting fake radio messages. These were ordinary men performing extraordinary feats. Their bravery wasn't measured by bullets fired or battles won in the usual sense, but by their ability to deceive a powerful enemy under dangerous conditions. Their work saved countless lives, redirected enemy forces, and changed the course of operations, showing that courage and ingenuity could shape the outcome of war as effectively as any gun or tank. The Ghost Army's missions were as daring as they were ingenious, and their impact on key battles of World War II was remarkable. One of their earliest operations involved drawing German forces away from the real Allied advances, creating illusions of massive troop concentrations in areas where only a few soldiers were stationed. This allowed genuine divisions to move and attack with far less resistance, saving countless lives. Among their most notable contributions was during the crossing of the Rhine River, as Allied forces prepared to advance into Germany. The Ghost Army set up decoy units and broadcasted sound effects of heavy artillery and troop movements. German commanders, believing they faced an overwhelming force, reinforced positions in the wrong locations. The deception allowed real units to cross the Rhine with reduced opposition, turning what could have been a deadly operation into a successful maneuver. They also played a critical role in Operation Fortitude, the larger strategy designed to mislead the Germans about the location of the D-Day invasion. While other parts of Fortitude relied on fake armies in England, the Ghost Army executed field operations in France, simulating entire divisions moving through towns and forests. Their work caused German intelligence to overestimate Allied strength in multiple regions, forcing enemy troops to defend areas that were never targeted. Throughout these operations, the Ghost Army used their full array of tools: inflatable tanks, sound illusions, fake radio traffic, and visual camouflage to maximum effect. The combination of creativity and military strategy created confusion at every level of German command. Reports of massive troop movements and fake battles circulated through the enemy lines, often forcing hasty and costly decisions. These successes weren't minor; they had real consequences on the battlefield. By misdirecting enemy forces and creating the illusion of overwhelming strength, the Ghost Army saved lives, sped up advances, and demonstrated that clever deception could achieve what brute force sometimes could not. Their work turned the ordinary battlefield into a theater of illusion, where perception became the most powerful weapon of all. Despite their ingenious tactics, the Ghost Army's work was extremely risky. Though they weren't usually on the front lines of direct combat, they often operated close enough to German forces that discovery could mean death. Inflatable tanks, sound systems, and fake encampments could only fool the enemy if everything was perfect. One mistake, one glimpse behind the illusion, and the consequences could be catastrophic. There were moments when enemy scouts came dangerously close to uncovering their secrets. Soldiers recall instances where German planes flew low overhead, photographing decoy tanks and fake artillery. On the ground, patrols sometimes wandered near their positions. Each time, the Ghost Army had to act quickly, moving decoys, adjusting sound systems, or temporarily halting broadcasts to maintain the illusion. The tension was constant, and the margin for error was razor-thin. Weather also posed a threat. Rain could deflate rubber tanks or wash away carefully painted camouflage. Mud could reveal tracks that didn't match the illusions, giving the Germans a clue that something was amiss. Even minor mistakes, misaligned shadows, or poorly timed sound effects could compromise the operation. Soldiers had to combine military discipline with artistic precision, often under harsh conditions, to ensure their deception held up. Despite these dangers, the Ghost Army carried out every mission with remarkable courage and professionalism. They understood that their success didn't just affect strategy, it saved lives. By misleading enemy forces, they prevented direct confrontations and protected real troops from unnecessary attacks. Every risky operation reinforced the importance of careful planning, creativity, and adaptability in war. The Ghost Army's willingness to operate under constant threat, using ingenuity rather than guns, showed that bravery comes in many forms. Their work demanded courage of a different kind: the courage to deceive, to take calculated risks, and to rely on artistry and intellect in a deadly environment. The battlefield was not only physical but psychological, and in that realm, these soldiers became masters of survival and strategy. The Ghost Army's deceptions had a profound impact on German forces, both strategically and psychologically. German commanders, relying on aerial reconnaissance, intercepted communications, and reports from scouts, consistently overestimated Allied strength. Entire divisions were diverted to defend against phantom troops, leaving real targets less protected and allowing the Allies to advance with fewer obstacles. Enemy morale was also affected. Soldiers who believed they faced overwhelming forces often hesitated, retreated, or fortified positions unnecessarily. Some commanders reported engagements and troop movements that never occurred, sending flawed intelligence up the chain of command. The confusion created by the Ghost Army forced the Germans into defensive actions in the wrong locations, slowing their response and creating opportunities for the Allies to exploit. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Ghost Army's influence was that it worked repeatedly without the enemy fully realizing the deception. Even experienced German intelligence officers, trained to detect trickery, were fooled by the combination of visual decoys, sound effects, and fake radio messages. Entire enemy divisions prepared for battles that didn't exist, while the real Allied forces carried out their objectives elsewhere. This psychological impact extended beyond the battlefield. By manipulating perception, the Ghost Army showed that war isn't won solely through firepower, but also through cleverness, strategy, and control of information. The Germans were forced to make decisions based on illusions, and those miscalculations often determined the success of operations. In effect, the Ghost Army reshaped the battlefield without firing a shot. They turned fear, doubt, and misinformation into weapons, demonstrating that intelligence and creativity could achieve what brute force sometimes could not. The enemy's confusion and misallocation of resources were silent victories, but victories that saved lives, sped advances, and showcased the extraordinary power of deception in modern warfare. The Ghost Army was a unique blend of art and warfare, proving that creativity could be just as powerful as guns and tanks. Artists, designers, and engineers weren't just supporting combat, they were the front line of deception. Every inflatable tank, fake radio message, and sound effect required artistic skill, technical knowledge, and careful planning. Painters and sculptors brought battlefields to life with their decoys. They created inflatable tanks that looked real from miles away, painted realistic markings, and even added weathering effects to make the props believable. Sound engineers recorded and replayed the noises of moving armies, artillery, and vehicles, carefully adjusting pitch, timing, and distance to trick enemy listeners. Designers arranged decoys in formations that matched real military tactics, ensuring that every illusion held up under observation. This combination of art and strategy made the Ghost Army a pioneering force in modern deception. Their work was more than trickery, it was theater on a battlefield. Each operation required careful choreography, attention to detail, and understanding of human perception. Even the placement of shadows, footprints, and small details like discarded equipment played a role in making the illusion convincing. The creative approach also allowed the unit to adapt quickly. If an enemy reconnaissance plane changed its route or weather threatened a display, the Ghost Army could modify props, reposition decoys, and adjust sound and radio operations in real time. Their artistry wasn't just decorative, it was functional, tactical, and often life-saving. By merging creativity with military strategy, the Ghost Army redefined what it meant to fight a war. They showed that unconventional skills, painting, designing, recording, and staging, could directly influence the outcome of critical operations. In a world dominated by firepower and force, their innovations proved that imagination, ingenuity, and cleverness could be the deadliest weapons of all. The Ghost Army's missions remained top secret for decades, and for good reason. Their operations relied on deception, misdirection, and the careful management of information. If details of their tactics had been revealed too early, the Germans could have learned to spot and counter their illusions, rendering the unit ineffective. Military leaders wanted to protect the methods and the soldiers behind them, ensuring that future operations could benefit from their expertise. After World War II, many of the men returned to civilian life, blending back into ordinary society. For years, their remarkable contributions went unrecognized. Even families of the soldiers often had no idea about the critical role their loved ones had played. Military files remained classified, and the public had no access to the unit's full history. It wasn't until the 1990s that the Ghost Army's story began to emerge. Declassified documents, interviews with surviving members, and detailed research revealed the scope and brilliance of their operations. Historians marveled at how a group of artists and engineers had executed such sophisticated deception under the constant threat of discovery. Suddenly, the world learned that entire battles had been influenced by invisible hands, and that the lives of countless soldiers had been saved by imagination rather than firepower. The secrecy surrounding the Ghost Army also contributed to their mystique. For decades, they were a hidden chapter of the war, almost like a legend waiting to be told. Once declassified, their story inspired not only military historians but also artists, filmmakers, and strategists, showing how ingenuity, creativity, and courage could reshape the battlefield. The Ghost Army's secrecy reminds us that sometimes the most important victories aren't the ones captured in headlines. They're the ones quietly achieved, hidden in the shadows, and only revealed years later. Their legacy is a testament to the power of subtlety, intellect, and innovation in war. The legacy of the Ghost Army is both inspiring and enduring. Though their missions remained secret for decades, once the truth emerged, the world began to recognize the extraordinary ingenuity and courage of these men. Their work demonstrated that war could be fought with creativity and intellect, not just firepower, and that perception could be as powerful as reality on the battlefield. Surviving members were eventually honored for their contributions, and exhibitions began showcasing their story, including the inflatable tanks, sound equipment, and decoys they used. Museums and military historians highlighted their unique approach, emphasizing how artists, engineers, and soldiers collaborated to achieve remarkable results. Their story also influenced modern military tactics, showing that deception and psychological strategy could play a critical role in operations. Beyond military recognition, the Ghost Army inspired broader audiences. Their story has appeared in books, documentaries, and films, capturing imaginations with the idea that art, creativity, and ingenuity could change the course of history. For many, it serves as a reminder that every soldier, regardless of role, can make a difference, and that sometimes thinking outside the box can be the most powerful weapon of all. Even today, the Ghost Army is studied not just for military strategy, but for lessons in teamwork, innovation, and problem-solving under pressure. Their legacy lives on as a testament to what can be achieved when ordinary individuals apply extraordinary creativity to extraordinary challenges. The story of the Ghost Army leaves a powerful lesson. War is not always won by bullets, bombs, or brute force. Sometimes, it is won through ingenuity, courage, and the power of the mind. These young Americans, artists, engineers, and soldiers, risked their lives not by charging into battle, but by creating illusions so convincing that the enemy believed entire armies were poised to strike. Their work saved countless lives, redirected enemy forces, and changed the course of critical operations. Yet for decades, their contributions remained hidden, a secret chapter of history known only to a few. When their story finally emerged, it amazed the world, proving that creativity and strategy could reshape reality itself. The Ghost Army reminds us that true bravery comes in many forms. It is the courage to face danger in unconventional ways, the skill to turn imagination into action, and the commitment to a mission that matters more than personal glory. Their legacy endures not only in military history, but in the idea that human ingenuity can overcome the most daunting challenges. In the end, the Ghost Army teaches us that victory is not just about fighting, it's about thinking, adapting, and daring to do the unexpected. They fought a war of perception, and in doing so, left a mark that continues to inspire creativity, strategy, and courage even decades after the last battle was won.